know what we know, though. So we have what's known as experiential reality and agreement reality. So experiential reality is knowing based on your own history. How can you apply those schemas that you've developed from the past to influence you? Agreement reality, knowing based on what others have told you or cultural ideas. Okay, because we know we develop not just by things directly happening to us, but by hearing things from other people on what to pursue, on what to engage in. Now, problems with personal inquiry or drawing conclusions based on our own experience includes the tendency to see what we believe because of cognitive blinders. We're going to talk about throughout the class some biases, some cognitive biases that influence how you behave and how you develop in general. Now, I think a bias that we can all relate to is the confirmation bias. We've probably adhered to this bias at least once in our life where, our beliefs are important to us. This is why we don't always falter or flip back and forth whenever somebody comes at us with different opinions. We usually come to these beliefs based on a lot of thought effort. And so we don't just easily vary from belief to belief because of this. And so as a result, because of our beliefs and them being important to us, we may engage in this confirmation bias, which is our tendency to look for evidence that we are right, and in doing so, we ignore contradictory evidence. Okay, whenever we are referring to psychology as a whole, psychology is a science. We apply the scientific method to our understanding of human behavior and the mind. And so the same is done in lifespan development psychology, where we're applying the scientific method to our understanding of how we develop psychosocially, physically, as well as cognitively from birth to death. So there is such an importance with the scientific method because it allows us to come to logical conclusions about our world, specifically related to lifespan development. So science involves continuously renewing our understanding of topics in question and the ongoing investigation of how and why events occur. Science is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We are constantly improving on it throughout our history. Now, any scientist that's worth their salt is, if they comes to you and they say they 100% have the correct idea, please run away from them as fast as possible, because any scientist who is legitimate is always going to leave room to be falsified or proven incorrect. So science is falsifiable, able to be proven incorrect. So scientific inquiry involves attempts to reject or refute a theory or set of assumptions. Okay, and this is important, this last bullet point here. A theory that cannot be falsified is not scientific. That also goes along with a hypothesis. We all grow up knowing that a hypothesis is an educated guess, but I would like to refer to it as a testable prediction, because a hypothesis and a theory can only be legitimate if it is able to be falsified or proven not supported. Okay. Now, whenever you're conducting a study, we have to put things into place to make it less biased. Because if we're left to our own devices and we're not cognizant of all the pieces going into our experiment, we can potentially influence the results to reflect what it is that we want to happen. So what we put into place, one of the things that we put into place is what's known as random sampling. So whenever you have a particular population that you're wanting to study, it's basically impossible to study every single person from that population. So you get what's known as a sample, and that sample has to be a significant number of individuals from that population, and it has to be random, meaning that every single person from that population has an equal chance of being selected for participation. All right? Otherwise, we can pick and choose who we want, and we may unknowingly or knowingly choose people that's going to fulfill the results that we want. Now, in science, you have two overall categories that you can conduct research through, which is quantitative versus qualitative. So when you're using quantitative research, as just a rule of thumb, you're referring to just numbers, okay? You're using statistical data. So you're quantifying or using statistics to understand phenomenon, to try and understand a cause and effect relationship. So you determine a research question, conduct a literature review of previous studies on the topic. You determine method of gathering information, conduct the study, interpret the results, and then draw conclusions. And with the scientific method through quantitative research, we don't just want to stop at finding these conclusions. We need to share our findings with the world so we can improve science as a whole. So we will usually submit this to peer review so other scientists can sign off on our work and consider it science. Then you've got qualitative research, which as a rule of thumb, it refers to people's lived experiences. It's less about the numbers, and the theoretical ideas are grounded in experiences. It begins with a broad area of interest. You gain interest into a group to be researched. You gather field notes about the setting, the people, the structure, the activities, or other areas of interest. You ask open-ended questions when interviewing participants. You modify research questions as the study continues, and you note patterns or consistencies. You explore new areas deemed important by the people being observed, and then again, the same with quantitative research, you report those findings. Now, when it comes to research methods and objectives, we have a few different forms of studies that we can conduct. We have these descriptive studies, which are objective to describe phenomena. So you've got these main types such as observational research, case studies, where you're looking at one person or maybe a very small group of individuals. You can do surveys, which you can do electronically or in person, and content analysis. Now, with correlational research, you're trying to show that there's a relationship between variables. Now, just because though something is correlating does not equate to causation, but you can see whether or not there was a relationship there in the sense of when one variable goes up, does the other one go up as well? Or when one variable goes up and the other variable goes down, that is also a relationship such noted as a negative correlation. Okay. You've got experimental research, which is randomly assigning people to different conditions. Use hypothesis testing to make inferences about how these conditions affect behavior. And then you've got explanatory studies, which are designed to answer the question why, as well as evaluation research, designed to assess the effectiveness of policies or programs. Now, one of the best studies that you can conduct, if you can pull it off, is an observational studies through a naturalistic observation. Because whenever you're observing people in their natural habitat and they don't feel like they're being studied or watched, it will allow them to act more in tune with how they, always are behaving. Now, the strength with this is that the researcher can see how people behave rather than rely on self-report. So one of the difficulties, though, is actually making it a true naturalistic observation where they don't feel like they're being observed. Yes, you can observe people in their natural habitat, but if they feel like they're being watched, the Hawthorne effect may come into place, where people tend to change their behavior, usually in tune with what they think the researcher is wanting to study or wanting to get the results of, or maybe they want to go against what the researcher is studying when they know that they are being observed. Okay, as I mentioned, case studies, these are really good at giving us a lot of information about a particular individual or small group of individuals. The difficulty, though, with case studies is that we can't generalize this information across a population. We can't say what happened to this person would definitely happen to the larger population as a whole. Now, surveys are really good because they're very convenient, I will say, in the sense that you can send this out to a vast majority of people and get a lot of participation. The difficulty, though, with surveys is they don't really allow for in-depth understanding of human behavior. And as we've noted in Introduction to Psychology, whenever you're self-reporting, there's going to automatically be some bias there because we as humans are not perfect, and trying to be introspective is not as reliable of a method in the sense of accuracy. Okay, and it's important to note that just because something is valid does not inherently mean that it is reliable. And what I mean by that is just because something is reliable, just because you get 2 plus 2 equals 5, does not mean that it is valid, aka accurate. Okay. Now, with content analysis, this involves reviewing media, such as old text, pictures, commercials, lyrics, to explore patterns or themes in culture. Some may also consider this archival research or secondary content analysis as well. So with archival research, this includes analyzing information that has already been collected or examined. So, the strength of this is that you don't have to recruit participants, but you also didn't get to conduct the study, and you're limited to just what the other researchers have the results of. And the quality of the data originally collected may be compromised as well. Okay, so with correlational research, I know I touched on it very briefly, but I want to reinforce it once again. So when I'm referring to correlational research, there are a few terms that we need to look at. Whenever I'm referring to a scatter plot, you're looking at one to the very right. So it's a plot of the relationship between two scores. Each dot represents a data point. Now, when there's a positive correlation, the variables go up or down together, so they move in the same direction. So when one goes up, the other one goes up as well. When one variable goes down, the other goes down. Okay, and then with negative correlation, this is whenever the variables move in opposite directions. So when one variable goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa. But just because there is a correlation, this does not equal causation. Okay, so a good example for this, there's a positive correlation between ice cream sales and drowning deaths. Okay, but does that mean that ice cream sales is causal of drowning deaths? No, it's likely that there's a third-party variable or a confounding variable. In that, it's the summer months. More people are more likely to buy ice cream in the summer months as well as engage in water-related activities. Okay. Now, experiments are designed to test hypotheses. And again, hypothesis is, yes, an educated guess, but I like to refer to it as a testable prediction. You're actually able to come to a conclusion on this. And so a variable is anything that changes in value. And variables are operationalized, which means the researcher specifies exactly what is going to be measured. So this is the major advantage to this is the experimental method is the only research method that can measure cause and effect relationship between variables, but the major disadvantage is the difficulty translating much of what concerns us about human behavior into a laboratory setting. Okay, so a basic experimental design begins with a sample. Okay, as I've already mentioned, a subset of a population. And then once you have that random sample, you are randomly assigning. So, like I said, everybody from that population has an equal chance of being selected for participation. But as well, when you have that random sample, you have the random assignment where each individual has an equal chance of being either in the experimental or the control group. Now, the experimental group is the group that is going to receive the manipulated variable. So if you're conducting a study on, you've created the strongest sleeping pill ever, and you want to see how that, inhibits people's cognitive performance on a test, then you give them that. And then you have the control group, which is quite simply the group that we are just comparing the experimental group to. They will not receive the manipulated variable. Okay, and so what I mean by that is you would give them like a sugar pill, which has no altering effect on the brain. Okay. Now, when you're referring to the independent variable versus the dependent variable, all you need to ask yourself, if you're given a question or scenario, is ask yourself what's being manipulated or changed. That's the independent variable. The dependent variable, all you have to ask yourself is, what are you testing specifically? So in that example that I gave you, the independent variable would be the sleeping pill. That's what's being changed or manipulated. One group gets the IV, and one group does not. One group does not get the sugar pill or the sleeping pill. And then you got the dependent variable. What are we testing? Well, we're testing cognitive performance. So in that example, the IV is the sleeping pill, and then the dependent variable is what I'm testing is cognitive performance. Okay, so another couple forms of study that we're going to overview is cross-sectional research versus longitudinal research. So whenever I'm referring to cross-sectional research, there are some advantages and disadvantages. Cross-sectional research takes a lot less time than longitudinal research. The reason being is because you're studying different individuals, in the particular areas that you're wanting to study. So it's less time-consuming, less expensive. And so let's say that I'm wanting to study the effects of smoking from the age of 18. And I check in, and then what I'm going to do for cross-sectional is I'm going to look at a different group of 20-year-olds versus a different group of 50-year-olds versus a different group of 80-year-olds. And so the disadvantage of this is it's limited to one time of measurement and cannot examine change over time. Like with longitudinal research, if I were to conduct the same study, I have a group of 18-year-olds, and I check in with them at 20 years old, 50 years old, and 80 years old. That's a 60-year study. I wouldn't even be alive at that point to find the results. So that's the difficulty with longitudinal research, in that it's it just takes a long time to conduct. So you have this problem known as attrition. And attrition is the dropout rate over a period of time. Participants fail to complete all portions of the study. And then you have selective attrition. Certain groups of participants may tend to drop out. Okay? So the advantage of it, you can measure changes with age over time about these specific people. But the disadvantage is it's expensive. Like I said, it takes too long, and you've got that attrition.